A child's letter lay folded in his coat pocket. It read, "Dear Dr. King, I'm only 12, but I believe in your dream. Please don't give up." He didn't. The son of a preacher. In the sweltering heart of Atlanta, Georgia, 1935, a young boy sat on the steps of a red brick church, his feet dangling above the dust, eyes fixed on the sky. His name was Martin, and the pulpit inside echoed with the thunder of his father's voice, a voice that called men to faith and women to hope. Martin Luther King Jr. was no ordinary child. He was born into the shadow of injustice, yet wrapped in the warmth of love. His father, Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., was a towering figure, stern, principled, and unyielding in the face of segregation. His mother, Alberta, was soft-spoken but powerful, teaching piano and kindness in equal measure. Their modest home brimmed with music, prayer, and books, a fortress of dignity in a world bent on denial. Martin's early world was not yet shattered, only bent at the edges. He played baseball in alleys, raced barefoot in the sun, and shared dreams with his white best friend across the street. But one day, the friend did not come. No knock. No ball. Only silence. When Martin's mother asked the boy's parents, they replied, "We don't want our son playing with colored children anymore." That moment didn't explode. It sank. Quietly. Deeply. Martin, confused, asked why. His mother, with tears held back, answered gently, "Because of something called prejudice." That night, Martin couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of a world that now felt smaller, colder. What had changed? He was still himself, same laughter, same skin, same heart. But the world had drawn a line, and he was on the wrong side of it. The following Sunday, his father's voice rose again. "You are somebody, Martin. Never let a man make you feel less than you are. God made you equal." Martin listened, really listened. Not just to the words, but to the fire beneath them. He realized then that his father's sermons weren't just meant for the congregation, they were meant for him. And they weren't just about heaven, they were about earth. About here. About now. As he grew, he began reading scriptures not just for salvation, but for strength. He would climb into bed at night and whisper to himself, "There has to be a better way. There has to be more." And in those quiet hours, a dream began to stir, not yet fully formed, not yet a movement or a march, but a silent flame in the chest of a boy who had seen love, met hate, and refused to believe they were equal. He didn't yet know what he would become. But he knew one thing. He would never be silent again. The boy who dreamed of a mountain. The boy who once sat quietly on his church steps grew into a young man with restless eyes and questions that books alone could not answer. Martin Luther King Jr., now in his late teens, left Atlanta with a suitcase full of sermons and ambition, boarding a train to Morehouse College. He was barely 15, but his mind raced years ahead, chasing something that could not be taught in a classroom, justice with dignity. Morehouse was where Martin found his voice, not just the one that echoed in his father's church, but the one that whispered in the pages of Thoreau, Gandhi, and Tolstoy. Nonviolence. Civil disobedience. The power of moral resistance. These were not just ideas. They were weapons against a world that called his people invisible. Yet outside the safety of the college walls, the world remained sharp-edged. One afternoon, while returning from school, Martin was forced to stand for hours on a segregated bus while white passengers sat comfortably. The humiliation seared him. He clenched his fists in his pockets. But he didn't shout. Instead, he filed the pain away, a quiet promise that one day, no child would be made to feel small again. In the heart of Boston, while pursuing his doctorate, Martin met Coretta Scott, a woman whose grace was matched by her steel. She was a singer, an artist, and a believer in the dream Martin hadn't yet dared to name. Their courtship was quiet, thoughtful. She saw the weight in his eyes, not just ambition, but burden. When he spoke of injustice, she didn't flinch. She leaned in. They married. And for a brief while, life seemed almost normal. But normal never fit Martin. It never could. In 1955, news came from Montgomery. A woman named Rosa Parks had refused to give up her seat to a white man. She had broken a law and lit a spark. A group of black leaders needed someone young, well-spoken, and untainted by political games to lead a bus boycott. Martin was hesitant. He had a new baby, a quiet home, and sermons to preach. But Coretta looked at him and said, "Maybe this is the mountain." He accepted. And so, a movement began, not with guns or fists, but with tired feet and aching backs. Black families walked to work, to school, to church. They were spat on, fired, beaten, yet they kept walking. Martin watched, heart heavy but steady. These weren't just protesters. They were dreamers in motion. And late one night, after a long day of meetings and threats, Martin sat alone in his kitchen. A voice inside him rose, still and strong. Stand up for righteousness. Stand up for truth. And God will be at your side forever. He exhaled. The dream was no longer a whisper. It had become a call. The weight of a nation. The streets of Washington, D.C., trembled beneath the footsteps of over 250,000 souls. Old men, children, students, mothers, all gathered not with weapons, but with will. They came to hear a preacher, a man whose words had already begun reshaping the conscience of a nation. That day, under the towering shadow of Lincoln's statue, Martin Luther King Jr. stepped to the podium. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. "I have a dream." The words poured from him like a tide, rising, crashing, lifting. It wasn't a speech. It was a vision woven with sorrow and stitched with hope. For 17 minutes, time stopped. In that crowd, people didn't just hear a man speak. They saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. But dreams are dangerous things. As the crowds dispersed and the applause faded, Martin returned to a life far from peaceful. Threats arrived daily. Letters, phone calls, even death wishes whispered through broken windows. The FBI tapped his phone, tracked his movements, and painted him as a radical. Politicians called him a menace. Some civil rights leaders whispered that he was too soft. Others said he was too bold. His allies wavered. His enemies multiplied. And yet, the people still marched. Every victory came with a price. When 4 black girls were murdered in a Birmingham church bombing, Martin collapsed in private. Rage gripped his chest, but he swallowed it whole, not because he lacked anger, but because he feared what it would turn him into. There were days he wanted to stop. Nights when Coretta found him staring blankly at a wall, his face drained. "I'm tired," he would whisper. But she knew tired didn't mean defeated. She would place her hand on his and say nothing. That was enough. Then came Selma, a small town, a small bridge, a march that would shake the world. Peaceful protesters were beaten with clubs, trampled by horses, blinded by gas. Blood spilled on asphalt like ink on history's pages. Martin didn't fight back. He prayed, marched, and returned again and again. Each step he took was heavier than the last, because he was no longer walking alone. He carried the hopes of a people, the sorrow of a country, the weight of generations. One night, in a small hotel room, Martin stood in front of a mirror. He studied his reflection. His thinning hair, the dark circles under his eyes, the worry carved into his forehead. He looked like a man twice his age. But when he blinked, he didn't see despair. He saw purpose. He saw why he couldn't stop. A child's letter lay folded in his coat pocket. It read, "Dear Dr. King, I'm only 12, but I believe in your dream. Please don't give up." He didn't. The mountain top. Spring arrived quietly in Memphis, 1968, but the air was tense. The city's sanitation workers, mostly black men, were on strike, demanding basic dignity. Rain had soaked their protest signs, but not their resolve. When Martin Luther King Jr. heard of their struggle, he didn't hesitate. He boarded a flight, despite bomb threats, exhaustion, and a body that ached from years of battle. He arrived not as a celebrity, but as a brother in pain. Memphis wasn't a national headline. Not yet. But Martin understood something others didn't. Dignity lives in the smallest of fights. A man picking up trash deserves respect just as much as a senator writing laws. So he marched through muddy streets with them, coat collar up, eyes forward. That evening, in a cramped church filled with weary workers and flickering lights, Martin rose to speak. He looked tired, visibly, deeply, but his voice was steady. "We've got some difficult days ahead," he said, "but it really doesn't matter with me now." There was a stillness in the room. Something unspoken. "Because I've been to the mountaintop, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land." Some said he seemed to be saying goodbye. Others just wept. That night, back at the Lorraine Motel, Martin joked with friends, leaned over the railing outside his room, and watched the sky dim. A single shot rang out. Martin's body fell, but the dream stood. The world shook. In living rooms, churches, classrooms, silence. Grief gripped the nation like a cold wind. Cities burned. Mothers cried. Children asked why. Coretta stood alone, no longer just a wife, but a widow, a keeper of the flame. She did not crumble. She carried his message forward, with grace and fire. But Martin's story didn't end in Memphis. Because you can kill a man, but you can't bury a movement. Across time and distance, his dream spread. To South African townships, where apartheid cracked. To Berlin, where walls fell. To Ferguson, Minneapolis, and beyond, where voices still cry out, "I am a man." To classrooms where children, black and white, sit side by side. To a nation that still struggles, but still remembers. Statues were built. Streets renamed. Speeches studied. But his truest monument? A generation that still believes in nonviolence, in equality, in a better tomorrow. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of a library, a child reads about Martin for the first time. He sees the marches, the jail cells, the microphone, the dream. He closes the book and whispers, "One day, I'll stand too." Because the mountaintop wasn't the end. It was a beginning.